So today, I'm going to speak to you about emotions. Our emotions are actually the most fundamental thing on the spiritual path. They are pretty much the only energy that you can actually work with. And everything else happens on its own. Insights happen on its own. Awareness reveals itself on its own. And even enlightenment happens on its own. If you're on the spiritual path, then undoubtedly you heard many things about awareness. Awareness this, awareness that, you are awareness, 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 awareness. You don't exist, there's only awareness. Many, many things. Confusing things, to be honest. For most people, very confusing things. But almost no one talks to you. Awareness of what? Oh, just awareness, they would say. Well, okay. Does this just awareness have any relationship to the human? And if it doesn't, then why do we begin to suffer less? Why do we become kinder? And how is it related to self-love? Or just love? The truth is that awareness, which we all so strive to find, as if it will solve all our problems, is awareness of ourselves. It's awareness of yourself. And for as long as you can hear or see, you exist. Something else doesn't. And when we start looking inwards, when we start paying attention to ourselves for the very first time in our lives, which is what constitutes the beginning of the true authentic spiritual path, is when you actually start taking deep interest in yourself. Then we start becoming aware of many, many things that we were not aware of before. And one of the most obvious things, one of the most intense things that everyone on the spiritual path begins to experience very quickly is emotion or emotional energy. Bottled up, tucked away for decades. Painful emotional energy. Difficult emotional energy. And this is what really requires your investigation. That's what requires your focus. That's what requires your acceptance. Awareness itself does not need any of that. It has always been present. It is life itself. You cannot not be aware. It can only be veiled by the game of mind. It can only be veiled by you being immersed in thought, glued to thought, attached to thought, and not paying attention to all the other things that are going on in it. Not paying attention to what you feel. Not paying attention to what else arises in your experience other than thought. Running after thought. Like a dog after a bone. And once we try to stop doing that, then we get exposed to many, many other things that are going on in consciousness that make us run. In hope to solve them logically on the level of thought. But we can't. I have not yet spoken to a single awakened individual that was taken aback and shocked by the intensity and the difficulty of the emotional energies that they had been trying to suppress for decades before their awakening. You can do nothing about awareness. If you have some trick in your disposal to bring up awareness, it's not awareness you're bringing up. That's not possible. But what you can do is you can learn to give those energies your loving attention. If you can learn to give those energies your focus. You can learn to slowly let them in, even though a lot of them will appear very difficult, will appear very painful. There are many things to say about other aspects of spiritual path. The other forms of energy, the bodily tensions, the bodily energy, kundalini energy, tingling, jerks in the body, lots and lots of stuff. Many of you have experienced that. But the emotional energy always constitute the most gross, the most obvious and difficult tensions when we just begin unraveling the dream and unraveling yourself. And all the other forms of experience that are oftentimes so coveted on the spiritual path, and the bliss and immersion in love and the peace and the quietness of the mind follow the acceptance of emotional energy. They cannot precede it. Even if they precede it, it will only be in form of a glimpse, after which whatever is still unexplored will come back in an increased intensity. And whatever you push away will invariably come back. It's just a matter of time. And some are easier than others, of course. Now, it's easy to experience joy, or it's easy to feel good. It's easy to experience something warm and comfortable. But some are quite difficult. And the most difficult ones are actually the most important ones. You're not going to miss the good ones, because they are the other side of the difficult ones. However much of the misery you still carry in you, the exact amount of joy will be released. However restless you are, the exact amount of peace, the deepening of peace, will be experienced. Whatever amount of pain you still carry in your unconscious will be met with the same amount of bliss when it is explored and accepted. And most people don't have a problem experiencing those other things. But it is very difficult to let yourself look honestly and objectively to the things that are in you that are really difficult to feel. But those are also the things that make your life worse. Not only they will come back with time, which is a certainty, but they also connect it to a skewed worldview that you have of yourself and other people, and how the world works and how the society works, and what you must do or should do and how you must be. They're directly connected to your bondage. They are the mechanism of bondage. You want to do something? No. That's shameful. You want to say something? Oh, that's scary. They are how we are conditioned. That's why they're the bulk of the spiritual path. They're the bulk of the spiritual work. Identity shifts, spiritual experiences, they're beautiful. And they cannot not happen. Because whatever you think God is in you. Whatever love you're still missing or yearning for is in you. You won't miss it. Whatever acceptance you're still craving for is also in you. But for as long as you run away from something, it controls your life, one way or another. The most insidious thing about it is that it does so in a way that is unconscious to you. So you don't exactly know that you are living against yourself. You don't exactly know when your behavior is automatic. And the tragedy is you don't exactly know what you reject yourself without looking, without honest investigation. You know, one would think, to give an example of how profoundly insidious and powerful this phenomenon is, one would think that a simple inability of a human being to rest comfortably for 4 hours without experiencing any difficulty would have to be a subject of a very deep investigation. Scientific investigation, you know, everyone should be talking about it. Like, what is wrong with us? Why is it very difficult to just lie down for 4 hours and not feel anything bad? That is interesting, isn't it? No. Not to most people. It's not interesting at all. Everything else is much more important. Well, maybe it's connected to how fucked up we all are, how fucked up the world is, and to a lot of problems and conflicts and misery and depressions and mental health issues. Well, maybe. It's right at the surface. You lie down for 4 hours, you can't. How can it not be connected? How can you say that your behavior reflects your values, your highest authenticity, reflects your true needs and wants and desires, and not just a reflection of pain that you carry if you lie down for 4 hours and there's struggle? It's absurd. How can you say that your troubles are all coming from other people, for example, or some circumstance? If you have not done this investigation, you just don't know. There are some that are easier than others. There are some that are very difficult. The ones that are most difficult for most people on the spiritual path are fear and anger. Grieving can be difficult, but tears are also beautiful. They're cleansing. It can be very painful. And I cried myself for many, many years, every day, after I made the realization. But there's a certain beauty in it, there's a certain relief. What makes grieving different from fear and anger is that both fear and anger have an immediacy to it that most other emotions don't have, whatever they are. Because fear and anger are one of the two most fundamental biological responses that are responsible for your survival. The biological function of fear is to save your life. Same with anger. They are a response to a threat, both of them. They're diametrically different responses. One is to run away, and other is to attack. But both are responses to a threat. And the only reason that you can experience tremendous amounts of fear and anger in the spiritual path is because you have been threatened before many, many times and not be able to respond to it naturally. So now even a slightest threat, or even a perceived threat, or even something that isn't threat at all, which is meditation, can uncover this long forgotten and suppressed and, in a lot of cases, misdirected response. Sometimes it takes years for people on the spiritual path to actually understand what they were angry at. They say to me, I feel like I'm angry towards everybody. There's so much rage. I hate everybody. Or I'm afraid of anything. I turn on the TV, I'm afraid. I eat something, I'm afraid I'm going to die. I'm afraid someone will kill me tomorrow. Because when those things come up to the surface and we don't yet have the clarity of what it is we're dealing with, which is always the years and decades of suppressed trauma, the suppressed reaction to mistreatment. And it starts so early. It starts well before we can speak. Then the mind has a tendency to come up with any story just to explain it to yourself. You know, nothing is happening, but there's a tremendous fear. How do I explain it? Well, there's something must be, you know, there must be some conspiracy against me, you know. Or nothing is happening, but I experience a lot of anger and rage. Well, how do I explain that? Well, something must have happened very recently to me. And I don't know what it is, but maybe this guy whom I talked to like yesterday, maybe he did something to me. And the truth is, at this stage, it's just very difficult to see that yes, something did happen, but many, many years ago. Another one which is very difficult is shame. Humiliation. Shame is one that we control each other with all the time, and especially it is how our parents control us. Fundamentally, shame is an expectation of punishment. That's why shame is so different from guilt. Guilt is also present on the spiritual path because it is impossible not to mistreat someone when you're in so much pain. It's not possible not to do things against your heart when you are deeply wounded. And so we all do. We all mistreat ourselves and we mistreat others. But there's a fundamental difference between the two. No one would have to be there for you to experience guilt. Even if not a single person in the universe will tell you that you have done something wrong, and they all will say, you've done nothing wrong. If you know that you've done something wrong, you will still experience guilt. Shame is very different. Shame is a recognition that someone else thinks that you've done something wrong. That's why shame is such a potent form of conditioning. But what's wrong, you may ask, with someone else thinking you've done something wrong? Why is it painful? Well, because usually when you've done something wrong, when you're very little, what comes afterwards is what? Punishment. So shame is anticipation of punishment. It's when you understand that you, in the eyes of other people, are behaving inappropriately, and you're scared. And so you're punished enough times, and then you begin to anticipate it. You begin to control yourself. The shame itself becomes punishment. So you do things that no one knows of. You're already an adult, and let's say you start exploring your body, or looking at yourself naked, or doing something that you thought were very inappropriate alone in the solitude of your own house, and all of a sudden you experience shame. The society that conditioned you lives in you. Your parents lives in you. Your teachers live in you. And they keep talking. And they keep pulling on the strings. So exploring those responses and looking, seeing, observing the strings that pull you is the key to liberation. And all the other beautiful things like identity shifts and bliss and love, they follow it, because this is the deepest movement of love. To honestly and truthfully explore how you feel and let yourself feel anything that comes up. And all resistance on the spiritual path is in truth resistance to experience, resistance to feeling. The more you resist a specific emotion, the more painful it is perceived to be, the more unpleasant it is perceived to be, and the more you are controlled by it. Those are one and the same. And at a certain point, if you do this work for long enough to have gone through all of the experiences that people rave about on the spiritual path, unity and oneness and God consciousness and all of this, and bliss, and your heart becomes clear and quiet. Your body relaxes, and all this suppressed pain is finally left the body. You look around and you say, my God, everyone in this world is controlled by fear, anger, and shame. Everyone is crazy. Is it an easy path? No. It's a very simple path, but it's not easy. Is it a very rewarding path? You bet. there is nothing that is better than parting with the pain that you have been carrying for decades. By definition, there's nothing that can feel better than that. In fact, most of our attempts to feel better are not attempts to feel better. They're attempts to mask the pain. Because most people constantly feel kind of shitty. And so we're looking for something to make us feel better. But instead, we need to start looking for ourselves. We need to start looking into ourselves. Then we'll find ourselves and ultimately lose ourselves. Or our false selves, shall I say, the conditioned selves. But no one talks about it. It isn't taught. So I salute you for having the courage to go on the most beautiful, liberating, and by its very definition, also the most painful path that will lead you to truth, freedom, lightness, honesty, sincerity, and will open your hearts to the degree that you thought was unimaginable. So this concludes my talk. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. What's the relationship between resistance and separation?
So it somewhat depends on the context. I mean, there are degrees of separation. It's not an accurate view to say that you're whether separated or you're not. It is an accurate view only in a specific context of using the word separation, which means separation of ego and consciousness, basically. So the feeling of separation is actually the feeling of inaccessibility of other contents of consciousness than your thought. So basically, the locking of the attention on the thought is what creates the feeling of separation. So it's the feeling of separation from yourself. It's basically it's when most of the mental it's when most of the activity that is happening in the consciousness and that is being paid attention to is thought. That's why people like extreme sports, feeling of flows, orgasms, because like for some point of time, thought takes the backstage. So there's a certain point of the path, where consciousness is realized as a container of thought and all other experiences. and other experiences are given as much attention as thought. And so the whole the the totality of the experience of consciousness is visible. Not just the thought train is focused on and everything else kind of ignored. So that creates a feeling of huge expansion of consciousness, the realization that consciousness is infinite. That creates a feeling of lack of separation. That is just a milestone, though. So it is much more accurate to speak of separation as separation from yourself, separation from your heart, separation from reality. And when we speak about this kind of separation, that there are layers and layers to it. It's not just a one single event where the identity moves from the thinker to consciousness, and the separation, as in I am the thinker, disappears. So we can talk about separation also as separation from truth, separation from love. And so fundamentally, we are separated from this in the bigger context by pain. By pain that is not expressed. So this pain can take form of emotional experience, energetic experience, the experience of a boundary also, especially if your vocabulary is spiritual, then you can experience some tension or as a boundary or blockage. Emotional, energetic, or sometimes quite physical, like for example, physical tension in the body. And the painful experiences, the difficult experiences which are rejected, they kind of make us retreat into something, right? Because in order for us, like let's say how this all begins, right? In order for us to maintain effortlessly the experience of infinitude of consciousness and the experience of non-separation, we cannot reject any experience in consciousness. If we start to reject some experience in consciousness, then we need to run away from it into something. And this something is usually thought. So for some people, this something can become a kind of an abstract, empty place. That's depersonalization. So it's like, those people that sort of tune out and don't feel anything at all. So but they still escape. It's a kind of an artificial object in consciousness where nothing happens, and they keep their focus there. Because it cannot be relaxed. That's why that's why so much energy often times is released during the process of spiritual awakening, because it takes energy to always keep your focus there. It cannot be relaxed, because as soon as you relax it, you start to feel everything that you were trying to escape from. So if you escape into thought, then you also reject a lot of experience in consciousness. It also takes a lot of energy, but you also continuously, what you're observing, what you're witnessing, is a continuous attempts of the mind to predict the future, to fix some experience, to compare yourself, find fault in yourself, and think about how to improve yourself, all in attempts to not expand, to not actually feel the things that we pushed away.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Thank you. For me, like, the resistance is the pain, right?
Yes.
And then the separation comes from resisting the pain.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
then that dissociation or whatever experience you're craving to shut off your pain is the one that is the separation.
Yes. It's an escape, it's a refuge from the pain.
And it's interesting to me sometimes how I intentionally want to feel things like shame or excommunication because they are preferable to the pain of reality, but at some point, or the pain of starting to accept reality, right? It just feels very dishonest to do it anymore because you're only selecting for certain points in your experience that point to a specific thing that you can fixate on and excluding out an entire field
Yes.
that has everything else in it.
Precisely.
That doesn't necessarily draw the same conclusions, that don't point in the same direction.
That's right. And you're also selecting for things that you are more or less comfortable with, at the expense of things that are still uncomfortable and the unknown to you. So that's why in the level of the mind, the journey feels like falling into the unknown. Because the mind, the thinking mind, pretends that all of those things don't exist. It pretends that your pain doesn't exist. It pretends that this thought process and whatever shadows of the sensate experience that get to your level of consciousness compared to the state of non-separation, they're all very limited, even though they feel very painful in dream state. It pretends that this is everything that there is to reality. So when it starts crumbling away, yes, there's pain, a lot of things to feel, but on the level of the mind or the level of intellect, it feels like a journey into the unknown. And it must be, and that's the only way that it can be, because the unknown is how you will view the world and how you will view yourself in the absence of beliefs that are so deeply entrenched in your psyche. Wrong beliefs, sure, but still, what's beyond these beliefs are very, very difficult to imagine. It's not possible, actually, to imagine. So that's why it is scary, right? So let's say you believe that the Earth is flat. Like no one knows yet. It's back in the days that the Earth is round, but you just believe that the Earth is flat, and you get some evidence that. Flat and limited, let's say, and you get some evidence that it is not so, that there's either some curvature to it or there are no limits to it or something like that. I don't know. You just maybe it's not a very good example, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you have just delivered something that shakes the foundation of your worldview. You may build a new one, more accurate, but first you need to let go of this one. And where do you let go into this one? From your perspective, into no worldview. It can be very disorienting. Okay, so if it's not flat, then what is it? I mean, you need an alternative right now. And even if there is, you will be presented an alternative that may be hard to accept. But in the spiritual journey, oftentimes there is no alternative at all. First, you let go on this one, and then much later, you might start building some alternative worldview.
I feel
and
like
so it can be very scary.
At some point, you just can't help it.
Yep.
It's like I can't not see these things anymore.
Yep. At some point, you just cannot stop.
I just, the other day I wanted to dissociate so badly, and then I was just like, God damn it, I'm still here.
And you couldn't. Well, that's great. Then congratulations.
Yeah, sure,
it's a great progress. So I wanted to dissociate so much, but I couldn't. This is tremendously great progress.
Thank you.
When you say spiritual journey, do you have a definition of it? Like, do you mean a journey to find your true self, to find your authentic self, or do you mean a spiritual journey to connect you to, I don't want to say the world, but spirit, like with God or whatever it is that you believe in? Which one do you mean?
First of all, you cannot connect to anything that you believe in. Because anything that you believe in by definition does not exist. Because you believe in it. So it's not real. You can only connect to reality. And connecting to reality happens through stop believing things. So the best definition of reality is that does not disappear when you stop believing in it. You can say reality is God, reality is love, blah, 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 and it's true, but it's not God or whatever it is that you believe in. Whatever you believe in does not exist. And if there's a question in your mind whether you are completely in reality or you are in some way in the trap, in the bondage, in the illusion of your beliefs, which are inaccurate, then it's certainly the latter. Because when you're in reality, there is no question about it. And usually it's the latter to a much greater degree that you can possibly imagine how deep those beliefs actually go. So the spiritual journey is the journey back to reality, is the exploration of what's true. The name spiritual is actually quite a misnomer. I guess it's not a really bad name because a lot of things that are happening on the spiritual journey happen in spirit, meaning meditative experiences, psychedelic experiences. They are dreamlike, they are disembodied experiences. They're the experiences of the mind, in the mind. And then there's awareness, which is just the same, another word for spirit, that penetrates your whole experience. And so the spiritual journey is a journey that involves this awareness, or it involves many experiences happening in this awareness. And you can say that this awareness is reality, but first of all, for as long as you're not in touch with it, you have not tasted reality. And then secondly, even when you are in touch with it, the mind can still harbor a tremendous amount of false beliefs about yourself, which greatly skews reality. So the spiritual journey fundamentally is the journey to reality, is the journey to truth. Awareness in some way is even an instrument rather than the destination. So you can rename the spiritual journey as into the journey back to honesty, for example, and it would be quite accurate.
I have 2 follow-up questions. Is that okay?
Okay.
One is, how do you know if you are in reality? And I forgot the second one.
You will know. The very fact, you can get in delusional states of mind when you think you're in reality whereas you're not. That is possible. But the very fact that you doubt that you're in reality means you're not. When you're truly in reality, you cannot doubt it. So you may not be in reality and be completely sure that you are. And there are some methods to test it, right? you can test yourself. You can see how your understanding faces the test of reality, you see? Like some people claim that they can walk through walls, they just don't want to, but they have never tried.
Do you?
So, but one thing is for certain: if you are doubting that you are in reality, then you're obviously not.
Do you have like a way to, one of the tests that you said, do you have it, or is that something that we're going to talk about in a later time?
Do you want to apply it to yourself? You'll fail them.
Because I'm doubting if I'm in reality.
Because you what?
Because I'm doubting if
Well,
I'm
not only because of that, but because there are obvious other signs that you're not in reality. For example, you suffer. Or just the very fact that you hear.
That makes sense. If nobody else has any other questions, I remembered my second question. Okay, there you go.
By the way, it doesn't mean that when I say, you're not in reality, it does not mean that you don't perceive reality at all. And so not, a misconception, when I say like you're dreaming, some people can imagine like getting into reality, enlightenment is something fundamentally different from what you already hear, see, and feel. No, I mean, I can see the tree just like you. The difference is that the dreaming mind very significantly skews the perception of reality. And not only it can skew the perception of our senses, which actually does a lot. So if you do not perceive this, or pretty much anything, to be honest, like if you do not perceive pretty much any experience of your vision as tremendously beautiful, like the vast majority of it, if you don't perceive sound as tremendously beautiful, for example, if you don't perceive your body as tremendously beautiful, then your senses, even your fundamental senses, are very significantly skewed by the dreaming. But what is most skewed is your perception of other people. Your perception of yourself, your perception of other people, and your perception of society. That's what's most skewed. That's why most sources of emotion is interactions with other people, and most sources of suffering are interactions with other people. And so it's not like you don't perceive reality at all, but the degree to which it is skewed and the degree to which you identify with an unreal entity, which is the ego, can be so dramatic, and usually it is so dramatic that from its perspective, when enlightenment starts to happen, it feels like it is actually dying and going into and completely losing its reality and going into a completely different reality. Even though the trees kind of still look the same, but it just feels like a completely different reality. So when Jesus was talking about heaven on earth, that's what he meant. He didn't mean that the earth will basically will literally become how you picture heaven. What he meant is that this is already heaven. And so compared to his previous reality, he called it heaven. So his previous reality was hell. So that's why, I mean, the difference between experience the world in the enlightened state and the dream state is so stark that it can only be described this way. And so so everything that is unreal that you believe skews your perception and hurts you. You can only believe things that are unreal if there is pain, because if you believe things that are unreal, it means that there is some self-deceit. If you have inaccurate perceptions of the world in spite of the evidence, and you hold on to them in spite of the evidence, and it's difficult for you to change them, it means that there's some self-deceit. And all self-deceit can only be supported by pain. Because in the absence of pain, there is absolutely no rational reason and any kind of biologically healthy organism would engage in self-deceit.
So I was wondering about, there's like I've experienced times of like really intense like clarity, and feels like everything just opens up and it's great. And at those times, it seems like I'm not going to start suffering again. But then it always happens again, and sometimes a lot worse. And I guess lately, for example, we've been experiencing really intense like anger at my mom for stuff that happened when I was like 10, which seems totally silly.
It's not.
Yeah. So I guess there's definitely some doubt. I experienced some doubt because I'm like, am I doing things wrong? And then I guess my main question is it's so confusing, because in those times of clarity, it seems like I'll never suffer again. And then it happens.
So you're not doing anything wrong. So in these times of clarity, is there also a shift in identity?
How do you mean?
What you perceive to be you, what you perceive to be I, this I that says I will never suffer again, or is it the same I that suffers?
I don't really know. I mean,
Okay.
I can't really sit, like, it seems like it's just here.
And then when you suffer, the clarity is not here.
If I were to describe like physically, the clarity, the suffering is like, and then like when there's the clarity, it's like, you know what I mean? I don't.
Relaxation.
Yes.
Yeah. So kind of letting go, relaxation. And suffering is kind of contraction,
Yeah.
tightness,
Like the brow.
tenseness.
Like
Yeah.
frozen.
So there are a few kind of ways to address your question of why it's happening. It's mostly not really important, but if you want to play some cool semantic games, so I can say, for example, that thing that has clarity never suffers at all, that something else suffers, and so it dies during the process of spiritual transformation, but it dies not instantly, in waves. Another thing, another way to explain it, which is a little bit more rational and less like kind of wordplay, is that my guess is that you don't experience complete clarity at this state. So, like, for example, if you were at this state, and I could speak to you and purposefully try to make you suffer, you would. So my guess is that because the experience is relative, the mind describes it with the same words. You know, like one time I said, there is such a tremendous depth of degree of experience, but there's only one vocabulary. And so someone who have been suffering for all of their lives, you know, if like 5% of the suffering falls away in a rather rapid way, they will experience more bliss than they have experienced in decades. And the description of it would be, oh my God, this is absolute bliss, unimaginable bliss. I have never had so much. Well, like, compared to someone who's much deeper on the path, it would be that much. But the description would be extreme. So something similar happens with clarity, right? So if it falls away, so something falls away and you experience more clarity than before, it feels like compared to what was before, compared to the period of suffering, it feels like it's an absolute clarity, and the mind pronounces, I will never suffer again. That's the absolute clarity. The mind is very deceitful. The mind lies all the time, right? When you truly don't suffer ever again, you never hear the thought, I never suffer again. Because the thought is about the future. And when you truly stop suffering is when you stop putting any expectations about the future. Because so paradoxically, the state of consciousness of no suffering is a state of consciousness of acceptance of any suffering that might come in the future. You see, there's this kind of little tidbit, right? So if you say, "I will never suffer again," if you said that to me, I would always laugh. You know, so when you say that to yourself, there's also kind of still some deceit going on. But it feels profound, and it feels like a very big contrast between this and what just was before. And so if that is the case, and I'm pretty sure it is, then actually all the other moments, the subsequent moments and glimpses of clarity will feel deeper and deeper, and they will be longer and longer. And so this process is always a kind of a dissolution of the misery into clarity and peace, and it always comes in waves. So there could be like a wave of misery, then some period of clarity, then another wave of misery, then some period of clarity, etc. So it's a kind of, you know, I saw a good video the other day that demonstrates what a process of mind purification actually looks like. Like imagine a glass of water, but it's not water, it's ink, right? And then imagine someone else starting pouring from the hose into this glass. And so it overflows, of course, right? But they pour in pure water into this glass. So first it overflows and it's only a little darker. It's like there are all sorts of strange things that are as the water penetrates the ink and all the but then you need to keep doing it for minutes, for a very, very long time, and slowly, and all the excess water just pours over the glass borders. And so kind of you will see that kind of slowly it's getting less dark and less dark and less dark and more transparent and more transparent and more transparent. So you do it like for 10 minutes and there will be just pure water there. All the ink has been kind of washed over the edges of the glass.
But while that's happening, you're going to be freaking out, like,
yes,
I'm losing all my water.
Yes. So that's, I'm losing all my ink. Yeah. I miss my ink. So that's kind of what you're observing, and it's never. In reality, it doesn't actually look like this because this is too smooth. In reality, it looks like peaks of suffering. Peaks and valleys, like peaks of suffering, then suffering falls away, some peak of bliss, then again some normalization of experience. It becomes a new background, you integrate, insights are integrating that, then again some issue comes up, peak of suffering, peak of bliss, and then again. And then just like there's a structure to each one of those experiences, there's a structure to the overall process too. So there's because there's a time before which it seems to get worse and worse and worse. Like the pain that you're excavating gets worse and worse and worse. And then there's a peak of that, and then it becomes easier and easier and easier and easier. And every new peak is getting slower and slower. So you can actually imagine it, the whole process as like, okay, so the initial peaks and the initial kind of, this is suffering, this is bliss, like, or the other way around, it actually doesn't matter. You can imagine it as like we're beginning, and then it goes higher and higher and higher and higher, and then afterwards it goes lower and lower and lower and lower, and then slowly it actually settles down. So that's just the nature of the process, because we're dealing with the unconscious. And there are some layers of the unconscious that are extraordinarily painful, which you cannot get to before you work with, let's say, easier stuff, right? And but every time you dive into it, you experience some suffering, then you experience some relief, but the process continues. And then when you get closer to the end of it, I mean, again, some teachers say there is no end, but I don't think that's a very rational position to take, because there is certainly, at least when it comes to psychological suffering, not physical, but there is certainly a point up to which the intensity of psychological suffering goes down. And it continues to come up in waves, but it's less and less difficult with time.
Cool. Thanks.
One last question.
Nobody else has one, or yeah. Go for it.
I just wanted to make sure everybody had the space. My second question was about spiritual journey, and what if you don't want all that suffering? Like, what if you just kind of, because whenever I was younger, I was always watching movies, and then there would be, the hero that goes out to save the world because they discovered that the government is doing something wrong, and then they go and they fight it, and then they bring on so much suffering onto themselves. And I always thought, well, that's so silly. Just close your eyes, and ignorance is bliss, you know what I mean? Just kind of live in ignorance. Like, what if you don't want to, what if that's a lot?
Your example doesn't really illustrate this spiritual process. So I'm going to imagine that you didn't say that when I'm answering it, basically, because I would have to then go into details about why it's not a very good example, and it's not a very good example of ignorance and is bliss. But you say, what if you don't want that? What if it's a lot? Well, first of all, it's always a lot. And it's also not possible to want it. So we would need to rephrase your question into, what if you never truly embark on it? What if you never truly embark on this journey? Because from some perspective, it's a journey of no return, and there's a point on this journey after which you cannot stop. So what if you never actually go to the edge of the abyss, so to speak, and never take the last step after which you're falling into the abyss? You may even walk around it, and take a peek from time to time, but run away every time, or just never have the courage of determination to go through it. Well, it depends on from what perspective. I mean, from the perspective of reality doesn't care about you. It's like, from the perspective of reality, you're one of the 8 or 9 billion people, most of them are deeply sick, who live on this planet for a moment of time, which is nothing in comparison to all time. And not only you're not important, you're not even important in the context of all life. There's nothing special about humans. Life is absolutely grand, and humans are just one small insignificant species. So from the perspective of reality, it doesn't care at all. From your perspective, you would still live a complete life, and you would not regret it, because every life is a complete life. But you're going to live most of it in suffering, consciously or unconsciously. You will not experience the tremendous beauty with which and peace with which it can actually be lived. And many spiritual teachers, and I completely agree with them, say that the difference is so striking that, like, for example, I said one time that I would prefer to live a few years like this than 40 years in the dream state. And it's true, and I would still agree with that. But you still will not regret your life. You might regret as you're dying that you didn't do this, that you didn't go on this path. But even as you regret that, you will sooner or later, you will cry your tears about it, and sooner or later you will make peace with it. You cannot make complete peace with anything that happened when you die. It's just a question of when you die. So even if you live life full of suffering and misery and depressions or aggression, you will still make a complete peace with it, and you will still forgive yourself. And it will just be painful, and you will also have a lot of regrets, which, including the regret that you could have started dealing with your regrets earlier in life and lived a better life. So you would also need to make peace with that. The only question is when you die. If some people believe in reincarnation, so in this framework you will be given another life, and you can reincarnate into the suffering world for hundreds of lives and thousands of lives before you actually die in enlightenment. I personally don't believe in reincarnation, which is actually a much scarier proposition, because it means that you realize all of that when you die. So whatever you kind of are still in denial of or lying to yourself about, by the moment when you begin to die, you will have to go through as part of the dying process. You cannot die and not come back to reality, basically. And so from that perspective, the near-death experiences, the all sorts of very strange out-of-body experiences that people oftentimes report is a part of this process. Basically, it's the same process. Those are the same experiences that people report, are very close, of the same fundamental nature that they report during the spiritual journey. And from that perspective, you will basically experience the whole of the spiritual journey during the 15, 20 minutes or however many minutes your brain will become active after your heart stops or something like that. But of course, no one knows. By definition, no one came back to talk about it. But though people talk about having profound spiritual experiences, not all of them positive, by the way, on the deathbed, some of them are quite negative. Some people see the purgatory when they die, when they begin to die, if they come back, if they were reanimated. Not all of them are always positive. So both stories actually serve the purpose of kind of scaring people into the spiritual path, and both stories can be used as an excuse not to do it. Because with reincarnation, you can say, well, okay, you know what, you're going to live one life, another life. Imagine thousands of lifetimes of this misery and suffering. Don't you suffer enough already? You want to live another thousand of lifetimes like this? Or a person could say, well, you know what, I kind of feel good next life, next life, I'll just do it in next life. That's okay. So with this too, you could say, like if you're not gonna start drinking this cup now, you're literally going to have to gulp it all up in a super intense way when you actually die. And just imagine how horrendous and difficult it will be. Or you can say, well, you know what, I have my life, I like it. Like if there is like, even if there's like super intense suffering when I die, I mean, who cares? I'm just gonna postpone it, and then when I die, I'll just experience it, and then it's it. I'll be over. There will be no life. There will be just, oops, nothing, whatever. So it just depends on your disposition,
Yeah.
But obviously, nothing like really bad is going to happen, because whatever pain you will experience on the way to reality, you already have. You already carry it with you. It's already there. For as long as you don't exacerbate it, and you will exacerbate it in some ways by doing silly stuff. But if you don't, but if you don't do really silly stuff, like if you don't become violent, if you like really, if you don't abuse drugs, kind of if you don't hurt your body, if you don't do really bad stuff, then most people, they kind of eat this pain, deal with this pain over the course of years. That's why there are so many senior people who appear calm and wise and more accepting and more loving. Like so you kind of deal with your shit as you live anyway. So I think for most people, not doing really stupid shit is much more important than whether embark on the spiritual journey or not. But fundamentally, they are quite similar. I mean, if more people were into this kind of work, the world would be much better.